What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I'm your host, Mason Kenahan, and today I have on a very highly anticipated guest who I know a lot of people have been waiting for me to have this guy on. It's Greg Mazzo. Greg, welcome to the show.
I'm doing pretty good, Mason. I'm glad to be on your show. I know you've done a lot of these in the past, and Giants Commanders this Sunday. I know that's why you have me on. Second time Giants Commanders will be playing each other this year. I think, obviously the Giants have been very good this year. The Commanders right now are leading the division by half a game over the Eagles, but division games are always competitive, so anything can happen.
Yeah, anything can happen, and you look at the two teams' records, complete opposites: 6-2 for Washington, 2-6 for New York, but like you mentioned, every divisional game seems to be close. You look back at that week 2 matchup where it was only a 3-point game and it came down to the very last play. So with that being said, let's just jump right into the injury report for this week. I'll start with Washington. Star linebacker Frankie Louvu did not practice on Wednesday or Thursday. This could be a massive loss for the Washington Commanders. I don't know if you've realized like how good Louvu has been over the last few weeks, but he's looked like an all-pro player, like without a doubt. And with Washington potentially missing him on Sunday, that would be pretty big. Now on the bright side, he was seen at practice during the media portion today. He was practicing with a leg sleeve on. It's a shin injury for him, so that is something to note. Cornelius Lucas hasn't practiced all week after being seen in a boot on Sunday after the game against Chicago. I don't expect him to play. It should be Brandon Coleman, who the rookie third-round pick out of TCU is coming back from a concussion. He practiced all this week. He should be good to go. And then Clelin Ferrell, the edge rusher for Washington as well, didn't practice on Thursday, but he was limited on Wednesday. We'll see what happens today. But beyond that, Washington's pretty healthy. New York, though, they're also pretty healthy. But a guy that's probably the big storyline on New York's injury report is Tyrone Tracy, who we're going to talk about a lot in this one. What have been your thoughts on Tyrone Tracy, and have you been surprised by his performance so far this season?
Well, here's the thing with Tyrone Tracy. I mean, early in the season, it was Devin Singletary getting majority of the carries. And then, he went down with an injury and Tyrone Tracy took over and he was showing a lot of flashes. If you go back to that game against Seattle that he played, he was huge in that game. And when you watch Tyrone Tracy play, he's more of just like a guy that's going to go more downhill, more than like, I'm not trying to obviously point at him a lot though, but a lot of the times when you watch Saquon obviously play, it's like 2 yards, 3 yards, 2 yards, and then he's going to break off for the 50-yard run. I think having a guy like Tyrone Tracy is a lot different in that regards. I'm not comparing the two. I think Saquon's a lot better, but Tyrone Tracy seems like he's a guy that's going to be more downhill. Obviously, guys, I think the running backs that the Giants have is more guys that are just going to fight for those extra yards. I think Tyrone Tracy is very shifty as well. He can catch out of the backfield a little bit as well too, which, from watching the Giants, obviously this year, he's been a major factor for them this season. I think, he's got a pretty decent future with this team because the way that I've always looked at this as well, like the Giants obviously moved on from Saquon, but I was actually fine with it. And the reason why I was is because they were able to improve in other areas on this roster. Now, I know that hasn't really translated much this season. And I think a lot of that has to do with the quarterback position. Obviously, Daniel Jones has been, what we've seen from him the last couple years and pretty much throughout his entire career, inconsistent play, injuries and stuff, though, although he has stayed healthy this season. But they were able to improve their defense a little bit, adding Brian Burns. Obviously, I think Dexter Lawrence has really proven to be probably the best defensive player in the game. I think right now he would be my defensive player of the year. He is just a monster. And then obviously you got Kayvon Thibodeau as well. The Giants defensive line is very good. I don't know if they still do, but they lead the league in sacks. I think their secondary is very, very young as well. And then offensively, I think their offensive line's definitely gotten better this year, but I think some injuries have definitely, derailed them a little bit, though. I think losing Andrew Thomas for the season definitely hurts as well. I mean, they were able to add pieces to that offensive line, though. So I see what Joe Shane is trying to do, but it's a situation for the Giants where they do have the injuries, and they're going to have to figure out a situation with what's going to happen, come offseason and where they end up in the draft towards the end of the season. Because 2-6, I mean, the Giants, I think they're going to be in a lot of games because I think the roster is better than what people give them credit for. And you saw in that game against Pittsburgh, they lost a one-score game. You look at some of their other games that they played. I mean, the Cincinnati game they could have won. I thought Philly was going to be a close game, but I think Philly just outmatched them with talent in that one. But the Giants, at the end of the day, even though I don't think they're really going to win too many games, I still think they could possibly end up with a top 5 pick. And then they're going to have to try to take a quarterback right from there. And I still think that's where you have to give Brian Dable and Joe Shane their time to draft their own quarterback, let them develop him, and then you can kind of like judge what the two are. Because I think Joe Schoen, you want to obviously give the GM time, and Brian Daboll, I've criticized him at times though, but at the same time, it's, doesn't have the right team to get to the next level to where the Giants want to be. So obviously there's a lot of issues this year though, but still at the end, I think, they got to figure out what their quarterback situation is going to be. And the way to build a roster is you got to be able to do it through a draft. And if you're not going to build a good roster, you're not going to be able to build through the draft. And obviously you can add pieces of free agency as well. So that's kind of like where I stand with everything on the Giants. I think Tyrone Tracy's been really good for the team. And I think it's a good split between him and Singletary.
Yeah. So Tracy's in concussion protocol. It sounds like he's somehow going to play on Sunday, even though they're just trying to get him killed. Really, I don't understand why, but Tracy's in concussion protocol. Jamie Gillen has still not practiced. He was out last week, the Giants punter with the hamstring injury. You guys actually signed a backup punter this time, so you're not gonna, which is pretty good. Yeah. Matt Hack is the backup punter for New York. That is pretty much wraps up the injury report. Beyond that, I think the big keys here on this one will be Tracy's status and Frankie Louvu's status. If Louvu does not play for Washington, 5th-round rookie Jordan McGee out of Temple will have a much bigger role. McGee made his debut last week, it was last week, so did not play a ton, but we'll see what happens there. So moving on now to the Commanders' offense against the Giants' defense. Let's take a look back at Week 2's matchup. Washington had 425 total yards on offense, 22 first downs. They got whatever they wanted against this Giants defense. They ran for over 200 yards. I mean, taking away the red zone struggles, because we'll get into that in a second. But what do you see is going to change? They put up 400 yards a couple weeks ago, even when this offense was still and this defense was not wonderful. Do you expect them to put up 400 plus yards again? What would change to help this Giants defense? What does the Giants defense need to do in order to not have that performance happen again?
Well, I think here's the thing. When you go back to the first matchup when they played Washington, the Giants defense had a very hard time. I remember in that game, they had a tough time getting off the field on 3rd down. They were converting 3rd and 12s. They were converting them on screen passes as well, and just soft coverage defense. But after that game, the defense for the majority of the season has been pretty solid, I think. They've had their moments where they haven't been good, but it's obviously going to be tough for the defense for the Giants when your offense is, not staying on the field longer than the defense. You're not owning that time of possession. It's going to put more pressure on the defense. It's going to make them more tired, especially towards the end of the game. So I think I look at a game like this for the Giants defenses, they're going to have to create turnovers, because Washington, they can move the ball offensively. We know they can run the ball. I think Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler have been a good combo between the two. Austin Eckler being more of that receiving type of back. I know Brian Robinson's, I know he had an injury too. I believe he's back.
He's back. Yeah,
he is back. Yeah, because I know you didn't mention him on the injury report.
Yeah.
But I think having him is definitely good, because he's had a very good season, Brian Robinson. And then obviously when you look, you got Terry McLaurin, who's always been there for Washington. We know Noah Brown caught that game-winning touchdown last week against the Bears, which was an incredible play. The Hail Mary downfield. Jaden Daniels has right now been electric this season. Obviously, he came into that Chicago game. We didn't even know if he was going to play or not. And they beat a good Bears team. That Bears team I'm actually really, really high on. And I think that could be possibly a team that can make the playoffs as a 6 or a 7 seed. I like their defense a lot. I think their offense is going to get better, obviously, with Caleb Williams. But, kind of going back to my point with the Commanders, I think Jaden Daniels has really created and revitalized this offense, because just some of the magic plays that he can make. Obviously, the ability to get out of the pocket, use his athletic ability. Some of the things that we saw in college as well, the deep ball accuracy. You go back to that game Thursday night, or the Monday night game against Cincinnati. That was really where Jaden Daniels kind of set the tone for himself in that game, because you have seen it from him all season long, the athletic ability, just the ability to buy time and try to make a play, and use his running abilities and stuff. And it's going to be tough, because the Giants, if they can't get to Jaden Daniels, and he's comfortable in the pocket and he's able to use his athletic abilities and try to make plays, it's going to obviously be tough, because if he's not going to be able to just sit in the pocket like any of these these quarterbacks that could just pocket passers. Jaden Daniels is mobile, and the Giants are just going to have to figure out a way how they can make them uncomfortable as they can. And the secondary is going to have to really step up as well, because if they get a little bit of separation, I think Jaden Daniels is going to find a way to make those throws. I think it's going to be interesting to see how these teams are going to start to adjust to Jaden Daniels a little bit once they start to kind of like, what's that one team going to be that's just going to figure him out and kind of like expose him a little bit? Because, you know, you always see that with a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL. Like at times there's going to be where you see a team just kind of adjust, and you're going to figure out how they're going to be able to game plan against this quarterback. And obviously, I think there's going to be a point where Jaden Daniels is going to have to go through that. But I think he's talented enough where he's going to have to adjust as a quarterback himself. And he's still young, and I think he's going to be a great quarterback. I think he's going to be a superstar, and you're already seeing it. But there's going to be a time where he's going to have to adjust as a quarterback on one of these teams that kind of just get the right film on him, and they kind of see what they expect from him and how he can adjust to it. So, I mean, the Commanders, I think right now, I think it's going to really be I think it's a two-team race between them and Philly. And it's really going to come down to those two games that they play. Obviously, we mentioned before that the Thursday night game, obviously we were mentioning before we got on the air, the Thursday night game against Philly is going to be huge. And then you're going to play Philly twice. So I think this will be, obviously it's a division game. Anything can happen. The Giants always seem to play well against the Commanders, just from my past history. Obviously, you probably know the same as well, Mason, and we'll see what happens, though. I'm actually going to expect that this is going to be a one-possession game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this Commanders offense has been on fire in recent weeks. You mentioned about teams potentially figuring out Jane Daniels. I think they've done a good job at making him adjust, especially in the game against Baltimore, where, I mean, Jane Daniels really struggled at the beginning of that game. And then last week against Chicago, now he ends up with, what was it, like he had his career high in yards, I think, at the end of the game. But beyond that, that first half, I mean, in that second half, really struggled to kind of finish drives. It's been a problem now for multiple games. The Giants game in week 2 and the game last week for Washington, converting drives into touchdowns. Before I get into the red zone struggles, though, you mentioned about the turnovers. Washington has turned it over, tied for the least amount in the entire league with Buffalo. Only 3 turnovers so far this season, 2 picks and a fumble. I mean, getting turnovers on Jane Daniels, a guy who I believe only threw 3 interceptions and turned it over like 5 times last season at LSU during his Heisman year. This guy does not turn the ball over. He makes smart decisions, and that has been something that really has carried this offense, especially on the later downs where, hey, it's 2nd and 10, right? It's 2nd and 10. You're under pressure. Don't make the big play. Just get to 3rd and 10 and live another down. Don't make it 3rd and 16, 3rd and 15, or even turn the ball over on like a 3rd and long. He makes smart decisions, and that's what's gotten this offense to the amount of success that it has, except in the red zone, really. 0 for 6 in the red zone in week 2. There was the famous 7 field goals from Austin Seibert to win the game. The red zone struggles continued last week against Chicago. Do we expect something similar from this Giants defense, or do you expect something similar with this Giants defense where it kind of bends but doesn't really break? And Washington's going to have to like struggle in the red zone and really put up a fight to finish in the end zone?
I think when you go back to that first matchup, the Giants were bringing pressure in the first half of that game. And I think Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator, got away from it in the second half in that one. And I think in a game like this, look, Jaden Daniels is a rookie quarterback. I know you mentioned about how smart he's been. The Commanders, I think one of the big reasons, you even said it, Mason, I think one of the main reasons why they're 6-2 is because they've been able to limit turnovers. You mentioned 3 turnovers they've had the entire season, which is tied with Buffalo. And I think that, not turning the ball over, winning the turnover battle, especially when you're a team that obviously on paper may not be as talented as some of the other teams in the league, and you got to find ways to win games. And I think that's what Washington has done this season. And, I'm not the biggest fan of him personally, but I think Dan Quinn, you got to give him a lot of credit as well. I think when you also look at Washington's defense, it's, we'll get into that a little bit though, but they've been kind of like inconsistent. They've had their moments at times this season, but I think the Giants got to bring pressure against Jaden Daniels, because they did that in the first half of the first game, and that's when the Giants defense was playing good. And then they got away from it in the second half, and then there's just times where they got to figure out how to get off the field on 3rd down, because there are some major factors in why they lost this game. I think the main reason is because they didn't have a field goal kicker, and rightfully so. Yes. The reason they would have won this game is because they would have had a field goal kicker, and Graham Gano got hurt early on in that game. So that is the formula, I think, for the Giants. You're obviously going to have a kicker, somewhat of a kicker in this game. finally. And
Yeah.
you're also going to have a situation with the Giants where you got to be better on third down. You got to get off the field on third down. You got to keep Washington's offense off the field. You got to be able to drive down, and you got to score in the red zone too, because that's going to be a major factor as well. I think Washington, when you look at them, obviously that's going to be another factor as well. You mentioned they couldn't score in the red zone against the Giants the first time that they played them, and they still ended up winning the game. But the difference is the Giants didn't have a kicker. So I think second time around, I think this is going to be another close game between these two teams. I think the Giants realize what went wrong in that first game. And if Brian Dable makes adjustments, I think going into a game like this, I know they do have some injuries, but I think it's really just about really getting pressure out there, Jaden Daniels. And if it's working, keep going at it. Do not get away from it. Keep bringing the pressure and make Jaden Daniels uncomfortable as possible.
Yeah, you mentioned the pressure. The last couple of weeks, that is exactly what Matt Eberflus did in Chicago, and then also that's what Zach Gore did with Baltimore a couple weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And Jane really struggled at first when they first brought pressure. Now the offensive line adjusted, and throughout the game, Jane got used to it. But when pressure is first brought by defenses, opposing defenses, Jane has struggled. He's had to throw like a few throwaways or incomplete passes, rushes his progression too quickly, and kind of just throws it away before he's even touched. And so I think pressure could definitely be a big thing, especially with a banged up offensive line that Washington has. No Cornelius Lucas. Washington has done kind of a rotation at left tackle between Brendan Coleman, the rookie, and Cornelius Lucas, the veteran, throughout this season. But without Cornelius Lucas, most likely in this one, and then Brandon Coleman missed last week with a concussion. He's coming back. Coleman's kind of been inconsistent week in and week out. There could definitely be some pressure for guys like Brian Burns, and even on the interior, Dexter Lawrence, like you mentioned, he's right now the best defensive player in the league. He has been dominant every single week, no matter who he's going up against. I expect Washington to double him multiple times. It's going to open up lanes for other rushers. So, I mean, yeah, like you mentioned, the pressure, if they bring 6, I'm a little bit worried about Jane. Now, the thing with Jane is that he can scramble out and he can make some crazy plays, and that's also the problem. But beyond
I think that comes as a rookie quarterback, though.
Mhm.
Obviously, like you bring pressure and stuff, and I think Jaden Daniels, this is when he's going to have to realize what it's like to go up against NFL defenses compared to college defenses as well. And obviously, he's done a great job with that, but obviously pointing out, if the blitz is coming or not. I think that's something he's going to have to realize and kind of progress into that a little bit more, though, and kind of take control a little bit, because if he knows what a defense is coming, he might have to go and change up the play a little bit. He's going to have to take control because he's their franchise quarterback. And what you're going to expect from a franchise quarterback is at times you're going to have to take control of the game. You're going to have the ball in your hands. And if you have to go and make those big plays, it's going to be on Jaden Daniels.
Yep. And we saw last week towards the end of that game. So Washington, in my opinion, they should put up 25 plus points in this one on offense. I think overall that Washington's talent on offense kind of just, especially their receivers against the Giants secondary. Deontay Banks, benched last week. What are your thoughts? What have been your thoughts on the Deontay Banks experience over the last year and a half? Because that was a guy that a lot of Washington fans really wanted and were kind of jealous of once they realized Emmanuel Forbes may not be that guy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can understand why a lot of Washington's fans had him because he's the Maryland guy. He played for Maryland in college, and obviously, that's very, close to Washington and Maryland. But I mean, look, he has struggled this season. I get it, but I think at a point like that, you can't do what you did. You can't be given those lack of efforts. Now he is expected to start this week, and so is Daniel Jones, but it's definitely been rough for Deontay Banks. I know he has struggled, and I can understand why, because he's kind of counted on to be the corner to go up against the opposing team's best receiver. He's the number 1 corner for the Giants. I think if the Giants were to have like a veteran corner. Now the Giants, I said their secondary was young, but I think to have somebody like Deontay Banks to kind of like have that veteran go along with him, kind of like learn from him a little bit and kind of just go through the experiences of what he had. I think that might be something that he needs, but this is obviously not a good sign when you're not giving when you're giving lack of effort like that, because obviously people are going to look at you a lot differently. We know the whole situation that's going on in Indianapolis right now with Anthony Richardson. Now, obviously one's a quarterback, the other's a cornerback, but he's going to get more attention because he's the quarterback. He's the franchise quarterback for the Colts as of right now. But honestly, I mean, look, we'll see how Deontay Banks responds from this, though. But I think you need a little. I think there has to be some experience in that secondary with Deontay Banks, and I think that could be something that the Giants are missing a little bit, though.
Yeah. Yeah. So that'll wrap up Commanders' offense against the Giants' defense. Now let's flip sides of the ball to the Washington defense against Daniel Jones and the Giants' offense. In week 2, the Giants' offense had over 300 yards of offense, 18 first downs. Kind of went under the radar, but they had a lot of success against this Washington defense. Now, I will say, I'm just going to throw some stats out here right now. Between weeks 1 and 4 for Washington's defense, they were 32nd in EPA, 31st in success rate, 32nd in dropback EPA. They were pretty much second to last or last in every single advanced stat. Now, since week 5, Washington is 4th in EPA, 3rd in dropback EPA, 13th in success rate, 7th in dropback success rate. I mean, this defense has had kind of like a rebirth in the last month. September, very scary month. It was very bad for Washington's defense. But Dan Quinn, Joe Witt, Jason Simmons, the defensive pass game coordinator, like these guys have improved this defense a ton. And even though they've lost Jonathan Allen, which has kind of still made the run defense pretty poor, but beyond that, like this defense has improved a ton. And what are your thoughts on kind of Washington's defensive improvement over this last month?
Yeah, so I think, you mentioned the first month of the year, Washington really struggled in that. And that was despite with them still winning games because of how good their offense was and how good Jaden Daniels was playing. But I think the defense has really started to come along the last month, like you mentioned, Mason. The defense for Washington obviously was a struggle. I think it's really starting to come along. Outside of that Baltimore game, I mean, their defense has been really good in the month of October. I mean, you only give up 15 points against Chicago. You only give up 7 points against Carolina, and you give up 13 points against Cleveland. Now, I know 2 of those 3 teams are not very good, but I think still when you look at how much better their defense is playing, even a Cardinals team. I mean, they blew out the Cardinals, and the Cardinals are not even a bad team as well. I mean, we talk about this all the time too, Mason, with Jonathan Gannon. But look, I think what's really been the turnaround for Washington is that I think you're kind of seeing the same situation with Philly a little bit, where they're adjusting to the new coordinators, and it's giving them some time to develop and kind of get used to their systems of Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. I think you're starting to see that now with Washington and Dan Quinn. We know how much success Dan Quinn has had as a defensive coordinator, which is obviously with Seattle and obviously with Dallas as well. When he was at Dallas, they were able to create turnovers. And I think with Washington, although we haven't seen much from their defense in terms of like a whole this entire season. But I think you're really starting to see them improve and starting to get used to the Dan Quinn system, because Dan Quinn has always been known to be a defensive coach. And now I think he almost seems like it's a Brian Flores type of situation in Minnesota, where he's getting the most out of their defense. They may not be the most talented defense, but he's finding a way to get the most out of those players. And I think if Frankie Louvu does not play this week, it's definitely going to be a huge loss for Washington. I think he might be one of the more underrated linebackers in football. He is very, very good. But against this Giants offense, look, you're going to have to find a way to get pressure against Daniel Jones, because this is a very weak offensive line for the Giants. They are banged up. Andrew Thomas is not there. This is where they're going to have to take advantage. They're going to have to get after Daniel Jones. And I think the main key is going to have to be to stop the run. I mean, I think if you handle the run game pretty well against the Giants, which I think could be the main reason if they start to drive down the field, I think that's going to be mainly because of the running game with the Giants and trying to utilize Tyrone Tracy in the passing game. And obviously, you don't want to let Daniel Jones get out of the pocket and scramble for runs, because Daniel Jones can be very athletic at times as well. So I think it's just about making him uncomfortable, putting pressure on him. That's going to be the key, stopping the run. I think if they do that, there could be a very good chance that Washington definitely wins this game, especially with how good their offense has been this season.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, especially with the run game. I think if there's one section the New York exploits in this one, I think it's definitely going to be the run. Now, in the past, I know that Daniel Jones always has his best games against Washington, but it really feels like the beginning of the end of the Daniel Jones era in New York right now. So I think if New York has success on offense, it'll be because of the run game, especially just because Washington's run defense, that's kind of been the one thing on their defense that hasn't improved a ton. It's improved slightly. They're kind of ranked somewhere in the early 20 range, which they used to be, again, dead last. But still, Tyrone Tracy, that guy's good. Fifth round pick out of Purdue. He's averaging over 5 yards per carry this season. And in week 2, he didn't really have like any opportunity because he was still behind Devin Singletary in the depth chart. He only had 1 carry against Washington back in week 2. And now since then, he's had 2 100-yard games and has had a lot of success. So if Tyrone Tracy does play, I am definitely expecting him to have a pretty good game just because Washington's run defense is not good. Plus, part of it is because of the loss of Jonathan Allen. That was definitely a very tough loss, losing him against, I believe it was against Carolina, I want to say, when we lost him. So, or Baltimore, maybe. It was one of those two. I think it was Baltimore. But losing Jonathan Allen was massive for this run defense. And, like, again, I'm concerned. I don't entirely trust this Commanders defense yet. I know it's been a great October, but still, I don't entirely trust this Commanders defense. So, any other thoughts between Daniel Jones and that offense? And are you expecting a big Daniel Jones game here in this one?
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, the Giants' offensive line is extremely banged up right now. That's why I think this kind of favors Washington, not only because I think they're the better team, but they're obviously, they're on the road in this one, so they're not going to be playing at home. And actually, as a matter of fact, this could actually advantage Washington a little bit more because if you know the stat with Daniel Jones, he hasn't won a home game since 2022. So obviously, this might have to favor
I did not
Washington.
know that.
Yeah,
Wow.
he has not won a home game. Now, obviously, a lot of that had to do with him being hurt last year, but still, I mean, what have you played already? You played 8 games this year, and you can't win at home, and then you get $40 million per year, and you can't find a way to win a game at home, especially primetime games. We know that story. I mean, we would know that story a lot. But anyways, I mean, look, I think for this offense for the Giants, if Tyrone Tracy plays, I think you got to find a way to get him involved early in this game. I think it's about really establishing the run if you possibly can, because with a banged up offensive line, I think Tyrone Tracy, who has really shown flashes this year, and I really like Tyrone Tracy a lot. I think it really just starts with him and getting him involved and, try to get the running game going, get Devin Singletary going. And then we haven't even mentioned his name, but find a way to get Malik Neighbors in those one-on-one matchups. Find a way to get him out in motion. Find a way to just get him some good separation, some good, good routes that Brian Dable can draw up for him. And I think if he gets the right matchups for him, and I think Daniel Jones finds a way to get him the ball, I think this could be obviously the toughest part for Washington's defense if they can't stop the run. And I think if they get Malik Neighbors going on offense, because we know how good Malik Neighbors was in that first game against Washington. So I like Malik Neighbors. I think the Giants are going to need a big game from him if they're going to want to win this one. And listen, at the end of the day, it's a divisional game. So a lot of these divisional games are close. The Giants-Washington games, Giants-Commanders games are always competitive. They're always close, just going back from recent years. And honestly, I wouldn't even guarantee that this is going to be like a Washington definite win, just because of the history between the Giants and the Commanders. Outside of the 2021 season, the Giants have pretty much manhandled the Commanders for most of these years. That was the one year where the Commanders actually swept the Giants, but they could obviously do that this Sunday if they were to win on the road. So it'll be a very interesting game, but we're going to have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah. Again, Malik Neighbors, 10 catches, 127 yards, and a touchdown last time he went up against this Commanders secondary. He was targeted on 18 of Daniel Jones' 28 pass attempts. That is insane. That is crazy. The target share there is insane. So Neighbors is, I mean, if he doesn't go for 100 yards, I think this past game then is just completely dead, because he was one of 3 receivers that were targeted in that game against Washington. So I like Darius Slayton. Slayton's been kind of nice.
I like Wan'Dale too. Wan'Dale Robinson.
Yeah, Wan'Dale's been cool too. So Neighbors against whoever lines up against him, whether it be Benjamin St. Juste or Mike Sanders still on the outside, it's going to be a problem. Neighbors is a very good receiver. He's probably second right now in Offensive Rookie of the Year voting, behind number 5 in Burgundy. But beyond that, that will pretty much wrap up our preview. Now let's jump into our final thoughts here and score prediction. I'll start with you first. Final thoughts and score prediction.
All right. So my final thoughts, I think this is going to be, I think this is going to be like a game early on. I think it's going to be very low scoring. I could see like a 10-7 type first half between the two teams. Maybe Washington or the Giants lead. And I think one of these teams in the end are just going to make a play, or there's going to be like a team that makes a key turnover that'll be like the difference in this game. And I think the Commanders win this game 24-20 on the road. They sweep the Giants and they find a way to win this game.
Yeah. Mine is somewhat similar. I'm going 27-17 Washington. I think Washington does win by 2 possessions, though I think it'll be a little bit of a closer game than what like the score tells you there. I think, like you mentioned, I wouldn't be surprised if both offenses get off to a slow start early. Washington is down at halftime by like 3 points, something like that. But I just don't expect this Giants defense to be able to hold up Jane Daniels and right now the best offense in the entire league for all of 60 minutes. And that's kind of what we saw for Washington against Chicago last week, where they did a great job limiting Caleb Williams in that Bears offense, who put up 35 plus points each of the last 2 weeks prior. But I knew at some point they were going to break, and Caleb Williams in that Bears offense was going to score points. And so I think a similar thing happens here between Washington and New York. I don't know if it'll be in the fourth quarter, like the last 2 possessions where the Giants defense breaks. It might be a little bit sooner than that, but 27-17, I think the Giants run game is good. I'm going to say they run for like 150 plus yards in this one pretty easily. So that's my prediction there. But yeah, any last comments here before we wrap up?
No, all I got to say is go Giants.
Oh man, that's that's something. But yeah, where can people find? I know you do some podcasts for Rowan Radio, and so and your Twitter, where's all that at?
So my Twitter is Greg Mazzo 21. So capital G, capital M 21. I do a lot of Rowan Radio stuff. For obviously the radio station, I hop on a lot of the podcasts and stuff. Offsides, third and long, 10th inning. I actually was on and one yesterday for the first time yesterday, and all that is on Podbean. So make sure you go and check that out on Podbean. You can download the app, get it, and then you can see all the podcasts. You can go to 10th inning, you go to Rowan Radio Sports, and you'll see all the podcasts right on there. You'll see 10th inning, and then the description. If you click on whatever thing you want to listen, whatever section you want to listen to, whether that's 10th inning, third and long, and you'll see my name on there, that means that's me. So make sure you go and check it out, though. It's very interesting. Mason, I know you're going to be part of the station soon, which is, we're glad to have you here, because obviously we're obviously looking for new people to come, and we're going to love to have you here.
Yeah, I'm excited to hop on these podcasts next semester. It's going to be pretty fun. So
yep,
that'll wrap it up for this week's episode of Keeping Up with Commanders. The next episode will be out on Monday morning, recapping the Giants against Commanders game. And then I'll probably have an announcement in that episode as well. So you'll have to wait for that one. That'll be it for this week's episode of Keeping Up with Commanders. See you guys next one. Peace.